Welcome to Move the Chains with Jonathan Rivers. Here's your host, Jonathan Rivers.
Let there be football. You know what time it is. Welcome in to Move the Chains. I'm your host, Jonathan Bam Rivers. College football is not that far away. I know you think it is, but it's not that far away. Early signees are now on campus getting ready. Spring games are going to be taking place soon. Media days, all of the stuff you love about college football. But I want to tell you, recruiting is huge. And I think it's become the new rivalry in college football. I'll explain that more today. And we're going to take more of your questions from social media because we love to do it. Last time, you guys were so involved. We want to give you more of an opportunity to let your voice be heard right here on Move the Chains. And for those people that think NIL is going to ruin college football, I've put you in the nonsense narrative booth. Just know that you're there. And I'm going to chop that argument up later on in the show because I firmly believe that NIL is one of the best things that could have ever happened to college football, and it's never been better. Hey, but you know how we do it on the show? Let's kick it off with First Down. College football is known for many things. You would agree with that. But I think one of the biggest things college football is known for is its rivalries. Whether you're talking Auburn and Alabama in the SEC, whether you're talking about Auburn and Georgia, which is actually the oldest rivalry in the South. You look at USC, Notre Dame, USC, UCLA, Michigan, Ohio State, Michigan, Michigan State. Rivalries are everywhere. But I'm going to tell you, I think there's a new rivalry in college football. And it's based on the lifeblood of college football, which is recruiting. And that new rivalry is your traditional recruiting versus the transfer portal. And I just want to put it this way. I've seen many a team recruit at a high level over the past decade and not be able to get the job done. So for those people who say, well, this team's only good because they recruit at a high level, well, one, recruiting is the name of the game in college football. So for you to belittle somebody because they recruit well is just dumb. But recruiting isn't everything. You have to also be able to develop these players. And a lot of teams, especially in the Southeastern Conference, when you look at the Georgias, the Alabamas, Texas, which is coming into the SEC, they not only recruit, but they develop. And when it comes to recruiting, the one word that you need to be understand is synonymous with recruiting is depth. Depth is so very important in college football. This is why you'll see teams who have players that don't play for 2 years, and then when they're their redshirt sophomore, redshirt junior year, they're on the field and they're all conference or they're all Americans. And you say, well, where did they come from? Well, they came from being on the bench because they had first-round picks ahead of them for those 2 or 3 seasons. So when it comes to college football, stockpiling depth is important. And now teams have a different way of doing it. So let's throw up the graphic right here when it comes to recruiting. I wanted you to see the juxtaposition here. If you look to the traditions, and by traditional, let me explain what I mean. I simply mean that these are schools that are recruiting your high school seniors, right? These young men that they probably been recruiting since they were 8th and 9th grade. So that's your traditional recruiting rankings. And if you see the usual suspects are at the top, the University of Georgia under Kirby Smart, Alabama with new head coach Kalen DeBoer, and I'll talk about him a little bit later on in the show. Oregon with Dan Lanning, who was a disciple of Nick Saban as well, and on down the list all the way to LSU. And I want you to look at that list. Georgia, Alabama, Texas, and LSU. 4 SEC teams. Now, you usually see that when it comes to recruiting, right? We understand that the SEC recruits the best. They recruit the biggest. They recruit the strongest and the fastest, not only of players, but when it comes to coaches as well. But I really want to take time to show you the portal side of this. Because if you look at the right of our graphic, Ole Miss is number 1 when it comes to the transfer portal. And I want you to think about who their head coach is, and that's Lane Kiffin. Lane Kiffin understands the importance of the transfer portal. Remember, when Lane Kiffin was at FAU, that's really how he built his program there and that offense there, through the transfer portal. And look at schools, Florida State. We understand what Florida State has lost, right? Well, Mike Norvell understands that the transfer portal is huge. So while Florida State's not showing up as a top 7 or 8 program here traditionally, they're using the transfer portal to their benefit. We already know what Colorado has done under Deion Sanders. He said he was bringing his Louis Vuitton luggage with him. And he sent 90% of that roster at Colorado when he took over gone. He said hit the transfer portal because he understands in the landscape of college football, typically I would tell people, give a coach 3 to 4 years to go through a recruiting cycle to make sure that he can build a program. Well, that may not be the case anymore. There may be an opportunity for you to build your program a little bit quicker, and that's through the transfer portal. Now, I will say this. I do want people to understand that recruiting matters, but also relationships matter. Because when you're taking these young men from all of these different schools and trying to bring them into a new program, the culture is likely different. The players are likely different. The scenery is different. And all this matters to 18, 19, 20, and 21-year-olds. Any change can throw them off. But now we're in a situation where you have traditional recruiting versus the transfer portal. And if you're smart as an institution, if you're smart as a program, you're going to use both. You know, I was talking to William, the sports director here, and he was telling me that he has a brother that's a GA at Jacksonville State. And they're in a situation to where their players are being recruited by D1 schools, and it may really deplete their roster. And that's the life of college football right now. Even these D1 schools in the Sun Belt, in Conference USA, and all these different FBS D1 programs are going to fall prey to the Alabamas, to the Georgias, to the Texases, of the USCs of the world, because that's the way the landscape of college football is right now. So when it comes to recruiting, you have to make sure that you are buttoned up in everything that you do. And a lot of people don't know this. Scholarships are generally good for 1 year, then they have to be renewed. So you can't just recruit 1 year out right now. You've got to recruit 2 and 3 years out to make sure that that depth, like I said, is still there. Because if you don't, you're going to see your time pass you by. You're going to see people in your conference pass you by. And now you're going to be left holding the bag, no pun intended, while everybody else is getting better. All right, coming up on Move the Chains, social media questions. Your boy's going to answer them and much more. We'll be back with more Move the Chains right after this. And welcome back into Move the Chains. As always, I want to take the time to thank everybody for watching Move the Chains. It's been a great success thus far. I've gotten a lot of feedback from people on social media, face-to-face. People are coming up to me. So thank you to everybody. And remember, there are a lot of people behind the scenes. And I won't name them all right now because I don't have a list. But when I do, I want to make sure everybody knows that I'm just their on-screen face. There are so many people behind the scenes that are making this happen, and I'm very appreciative. All right, guys, social media is always a buzz, especially when it comes to college football. So let's not waste any time. I'm going to answer your questions. Let's get the second down. All right, so let's go ahead and throw up the first question right here. Let's not let anybody wait. Let's go ahead and get it done. All right, so Mike T asked, will Alabama still be a top-tier program under new head coach Kalen DeBoer? Well, Mike T, I know you probably don't want me to answer a question with a question, but I will in this case. You asked me, will Alabama still be a top-tier program? My question is, what do you define a top-tier program as? Does Kalen DeBoer need to win a national championship in his first 2 or 3 seasons at Alabama to be a top-tier program? Does he simply need to make the college football playoff in the first 3 or 4 years as a top-tier program? Does he have to be a top recruiting class every year like Nick Saban was to be a top-tier program? Well, this is my thing. There's a lot of chatter in Tuscaloosa, and people think that Kalen DeBoer is taking the approach of trying to be a player-friendly coach, and they're comparing that to what Nick Saban did. The one thing that you should never do as a fan base, as a coaching staff, as a pundit, as anybody, is worry about comparing the new head coach to the old head coach, especially in this case because there will not be another Nick Saban. If you're Kalen DeBoer, you want to make sure that you come in and set the culture and set the tone for your program. But to answer your question directly, Mike T, I think Alabama will be a top-tier program, but I don't think that a decline is out of the question. I think a step back in the first couple of years is imminent just because of the way college football is, the coach that he has to go against in this conference, and understanding how to recruit in the SEC. So while Alabama has committed to him for the next decade, I think they understand it, and they're going to give him time to try to build a program of his own. All right, let's go to the next question. Caleb asked, does the new 12-team college football playoff format minimize the importance of the regular season? Caleb, I appreciate you throwing this question to me. And listen, if you would have asked me this 5 years ago, I would have said absolutely. I don't want expansion. It's great when there are 2 teams. Every game matters. They've got to fight it out. If you don't win in the regular season, then you're punished. But honestly, now I've changed my viewpoint on that. I think it's great for the game, and I don't think it'll minimize the regular season, because when it comes to the college football playoff format, there are going to be buys that can be had. And we've got a graphic for this. I want to show you guys something. There are going to be opportunities for teams week in and week out to compete. Because listen, just because they expanded it to 12 doesn't mean it's going to be easy. Now, this is a simulated college football team playoff with a 12-team format from the November rankings back in 2023. And you can see the top 4 conference champions will get the top 4 seeds. And in this case, it would have been Georgia, Florida State, Washington, and Michigan. They get buys. And after a 12-game season, especially if you're in a conference like the Big Ten or the SEC, if you're in a 12-game season and you're able to get a bye before you play the likes of an Alabama or an Oregon or Ohio State or a Texas, that's important. Every game will still matter when it comes to the college football playoff format. And I want everybody to understand something. Georgia, in this case, remember last year they lost one game, and that was to Alabama. And that was in the conference championship. And they found themselves on the outside looking in. So when that's the case, a 12-team format will just ensure that the best teams still get an opportunity to play. And for all of you people who think that, you know what, I love the format because it's going to give the little guy like the Tulanes of the world time to win a national championship, let me tell you something. It'll still be the usual suspects. All right, last question here. Let's get it. Who will benefit more from moving to the SEC, Oklahoma or Texas? Gabby, I appreciate the question, and the quick answer is Texas. Money, money, and more money. Texas has also played Alabama the past 2 seasons. Steve Sarkisian has also been an assistant in the SEC. He understands the landscape of this conference. Texas will not be phased. The lights will not be too bright. I'm not saying they're going to come out and win the SEC in their first year, but I will say this. We have seen teams come to the SEC from the Big 12 and play in the SEC championship game. Missouri did it. So don't think Texas is not also in that type vein to where they can come and make a big splash their first year here. All right, coming up after the break, ladies and gentlemen, nonsense narratives. NILs are bad for college football. You must be crazy. And I'll tell you why. More Move the Chains right after this. And welcome back in to Move the Chains. You know, a lot of people would call me combative. My wife is one of them. She says, Jonathan, I think you just like to argue for the sake of arguing. And that's not true. I do love to argue, but the sake of arguing for arguing is not me. I love to argue with people who create comments and they want to go back and forth, and I love that. I love hearing differing opinions from other people. But when those opinions have no substance, that's kind of when I get upset. And that's what this nonsense narrative segment is all about. So we've got a great one today. Let's go ahead and run it. Not all change is good. Not all change is bad. I know this sounds like I'm playing both sides of the fence, but that's the truth of the situation. And when I look at name, image, and likeness, I have a good friend of mine, and he's an Auburn guy real close to the program, and he always talks about name, image, and likeness, and always gets into the particulars. And he says that name, image, and likeness is, he thinks, going to kill college football because these young men are only going to worry about getting paid for money. They're not going to worry about being developed. I don't know if you heard the sound from Nick Saban a few weeks ago, and he was really, really disturbed by the way college football is trending in terms of these young men not wanting to develop. And listen, Nick Saban has his right to his opinion. He's one of the greatest to ever do it, so I'm not going to sit here and say he can't have that opinion. Mine just differs from his. I think that name, image, and likeness, which if you don't know what that is, this gives young men and women in NCAA, in this case college football, the opportunity to get paid based on their brand. Not based on the play on the field, but based on their brand, based on who they are, based on some things that they've done off the field. They are able to get paid because colleges are getting paid huge amounts of money because they're a part of their programs. And I want to show this graphic for everybody. We want to talk about NIL, or name, image, and likeness valuations for some of the top players in college football. And I want to ask you this question. I look at the top 3, Shedeur Sanders, Arch Manning, and Travis Hunter, all bringing in over $2 million a year. And then you can look at the rest of the list for yourself there. I want to go into why, in detail, this is very good for college football and for colleges in general. The 3 I have highlighted is Shedeur, Arch, and Travis. They have huge social media followings, whether it's TikTok, whether it's Snapchat, all this type stuff. Now, why is that important? Well, do you remember when Deion Sanders went to Colorado, left Jackson State, and brought Shedeur and Travis with him? And the first couple of games, the spring game was sold out at Colorado. And then every game during the regular season was sold out at Colorado. You had guys like Lil Wayne. You had The Rock. You had Quavo from the Migos. You had all these different celebrities coming to Colorado. Why? Because it was the biggest part in college football. It was reminiscent of the USC days under Pete Carroll when they had Reggie Bush and Matt Leinart and they had Lindell White, all those guys. That's what it is. So do you not think that college students want to be a part of that party? When you have these young men that are very, very, very recognizable, that are also ballers on the field, it makes young men and women 18 to 22 want to flock to that school. And what happens when they're coming to your school, ladies and gentlemen? They're paying tuition. And what happens when they're paying tuition? It is beefing up the base of that college from a financial standpoint. So you still want to tell me NIL is bad for college? It's not bad for college. It's great for college. And it's even greater for the players because the players now have the opportunity to maximize their earning potential at the greatest opportunity of their life when they're 18 to 22 years old. What if they don't have the opportunity to earn this kind of money that's generational wealth and life-changing money for them and their family? I don't have a problem with that. They don't have to be 40 and 50 years old. We see people now that are 9 or 10 years old earning that money, and this is what NIL is. Will people leave schools due to NIL? Yes, they will. But I'm going to give you a newsflash. People were leaving schools before NIL was a thing. When colleges were making money off of everybody, they were leaving to go to the SEC so they could have more opportunities to be on national television. They were leaving then because their profile was bigger. Now NIL and social media is making a profile for these student athletes even better, and I love it for them. All right, coming up, the last segment of the show is going to be the final drive. We'll be back with more Move the Chains right after this. And welcome back into the show. Let's not waste any time. It's time for the final drive. College football has never been better. I love everything that college football has to offer right now. Now, I don't love necessarily conference realignment, but I love the fact that they're now being truthful and understanding that geographic location has nothing to do with the conferences that you're in. If you go and look at the new conference realignment, it's crazy. But I love NIL. I love the transfer portal. I love the new coaches that are coming into college football. And I love all of it because accountability to me has been higher than it's ever been. When players leave, or when players think that the grass is greener on the other side, or when coaches are leaving, it means that they can't blame anybody else but themselves if it doesn't go right. They can't blame the NCAA because the NCAA used to hold players out for a year when they tried to transfer from D1 school to D1 school, but that's no longer the case. I love the fact that college football is growing and expanding, and you're going to love it too in my estimation. Hey, this has been another episode of Move the Chains. For everybody out there, make sure you understand that we're on every Saturday at 9:30 a.m., not just here on WXTX Fox 54, but on YouTube as well. Let there be football, and as always, make sure you have a blessed day. I'll see you next time.